all religions are not the same. For example, in Christianity, you will find a very personalistic religion, which distinguishes it from every other expression of faith. You're going to find elsewhere a personal dimension to some degree, but never to the level that you find in Christianity, where the core affirmation is the view of God as person, God as personal. And the remarkable consequence of that emphasis on the personal is that, and I quote from Peter L. Berger, the personhood of God gives ultimate validity to the personhood of human beings. The personhood of God gives ultimate validity to the personhood of human beings. Such an emphasis emphatically validates the infinite worth and dignity of the human person. Indeed, the incomparable Christian perspective is that personality is the glory of the universe. And this regard for the personal is coming from what Berger calls an insight into the relation between the human condition, and the ultimate constitution of reality. The insight is that the personal relationship between man and God is, to use Berger's phrase, an ontological antiphony. Now, to understand this phrase, ontological antiphony, think of the antiphonal singing of a choir. That's when a choir engages in alternate or responsive singing. In an antiphonal relationship, there's a highly personal correspondence. There's this back and forth and indicating like a symmetry between God's nature and human nature, like from being to being. It's a highly personal communication between two distinct entities. So the emphasis on the personal in Christianity is what gives it its crucially distinctive quality, which is, put very simply, that the person matters. The person matters, which means that you as you matter. This is affirmed in the Eastern Orthodox communion rite, where the priest addresses you by name when you receive communion. It's a particular you that is being recognized and addressed. The Eucharist is an affirmation that the highest and deepest personal point of contact between man and God is a deeply personal event. Now, it's sometimes been expressed, especially by mystics, that this emphasis upon the personal dimension is some kind of unenlightened level of understanding that must be overcome or transcended. That is, the thinking is that the sense that you have of yourself as a distinct somebody has to be abrogated. You've got to get past what's called your illusory sense of a separate self. You've got to let go of your delusion, your sense of a limited identity, to realize your identity with God or with that. You've got to let go of your sense of yourself in order to enter a deeper, impersonal reality or dimension. You're to break past what Martin Buber called the I-thou relationship. So it's thought that access to the higher impersonal realm can only be reached if I leave behind all vestiges of my empirical self. Well, this was Meister Eckhart's point when he distinguished between God, the personal God of biblical revelation, and what he called the Godhead, the impersonal divinity of mystical experience. So mystics like Eckhart use the language of a merger with the divine that, in a sense, takes you out. And thus it's said that in the mystical experience, nothing remains of you as you. In other words, you as you are no more. In the mystical experience, it's said that you become God, or you've realized that you are that. But you are most certainly not you, like game over. And yet, I've never thought that those who talk about this mystic union or fusion with the divine ever really pull it off. Like, you can still find them knocking about. They're still flesh and blood, no matter how high they have soared. That is, there will be, in spite of all the talk of being absorbed into the divine, there remains a concern for the personal and the particular. Why? Because, you cannot get away from it. For example, in the tradition that I know best, that of Siddha Yoga, the talk is almost constant about merging with the divine as the highest ideal. And yet, when you visit a Siddha Yoga ashram, you'll clearly see that the highest emphasis of the place is upon the uniqueness, indeed the particularity, of the meditation master. You can barely walk a few steps without seeing a picture of the guru, and you'll hear everybody exclaim that there's nobody like her. Like, she's that distinct. Another case in point is that I once stayed in a home in Seattle where there were pictures of the City Yoga guru everywhere, like pictures of her scotch taped on the lamp next to my bed and on the table and on all four walls all around me. Like, pretty well everywhere I looked, there she was. It was, how can I say, with kindly and with respect, it was a little much. Although I would not have been impressed either seeing pictures everywhere like Jesus and the sheep. Can't take either. And so therefore, the idea of what it means for man and God to become one, if we think about this business of what is happening when there's the experience of union with God, well, it needs to be qualified, which prompts me to then look at what's the nature of a high quality relationship? What goes on in a high quality relationship? Well, there's union, you've become as one, and yet separation is maintained, like both are there together. For when, and you may have seen this, when one person is absorbed in another, identity lost, you know you've got trouble, or at least you've got something going on rather immature. Whereas in contrast, where there is a strong and vital union between two persons, personality isn't obliterated, it is enhanced. The union between the two people enables each to become more and more particular. If they're not becoming more and more particular, there's something wrong. Each becomes stronger as well in that experience of unity together. Otherwise, you've got something gooey going on and maybe should start over. Except that next time, before you throw yourself at Betty Sue, you need to first find a life. For if Betty Sue is to become somebody in her relationship with you, well, she needs to be connected with you as if you're somebody, that you're someone who has become somebody. Like, it has to be somebody to somebody, strength to strength, to have a great relationship. Now, Peter Berger's question has always been mine about the nature of ultimate reality. He asks, I think this is such a great question, so profound. I want to know, says Peter Berger, whether this reality, whether ultimate reality is in any way capable of interacting with me in a way that does not negate my personhood. So what's implied in Peter's question is that he's giving a strong yes to the experience of union with God, union with the divine. But at the same time, he's saying a strong no to the negation of personality. In other words, both things need to be there, union and separation. So for Berger, certain experiences have served to clarify his thinking on the subject of the meaning of union with God. So here's the story as he tells it in his words. On my first trip to India, I was in Calcutta, on my way to visit a religious scholar, when I encountered a Hindu funeral procession. It's a shocking sight, he says, for a modern Westerner, since there's no coffin. The corpse, in this instance an old man, lies exposed on a wooden plank. There was a rather small number of mourners in the procession, and some of them were chanting. Well, they were chanting from the Bhagavad Gita, like the Song of the Lord. And where it reads, and Peter later looked this up in the hotel room, he was reading the Bhagavad Gita, even as a person casts off worn out clothes and puts on others that are new, so the embodied self casts off worn out bodies and enters others that are new. This is what was happening in the funeral procession. That's what's being said, is that the embodied self is casting off an old body and getting ready to enter into another one. And about this indestructible sense of self, or of self that's going to go on into another body, weapons cut it not. This is what the Gita says about it all. Fire burns it not. Water wets it not. The wind does not wither it. This self cannot be cut, nor burnt, nor wetted, nor withered. Eternal, all-pervading, unchanging, immovable. The self is the same forever. This self is said to be unmanifest, incomprehensible, unchangeable. Therefore, the Gita says, knowing this to be so, you should not grieve. You should not grieve when you realize the indestructibility of this self that's going on from one body to another. Do not grieve. So it's supposed to be a source of consolation to any mourner, but of no comfort to, guess who? Peter Berger, whose response was, if I had been one of the mourners in the funeral procession, I would not have been consoled. Well, why no consolation? Well, Berger works out for himself in his book, Questions of Faith. He worked out for himself that he could only believe in a religion that upheld three essentials. And these are, first, the infinite value of this person, the infinite value of this body, and the infinite value of this world. Since the Gita does not emphasize the unique value of these empirical realities, Berger felt himself compelled to say no to the Gita. And yet, here's quite the point, because he adds that to say no does not mean that the experience underlying the worldview of the Gita is simply an illusion. No, the Hindus have got a point, as do the mystics in the Christian religion, which is that the experience, the mystical experience in which the self loses itself in an ocean of universal being, is a real experience. Like, it's not illusory, it's not wrong, bad, or bad, like it's a real experience. And then he adds, it would be presumptuous and implausible to propose that this experience is nothing but several millennia's worth of illusion. No, indeed, Berger celebrates the liberating quality of the mystic experience. To give up, he says, the tensions and contradictions of the self is a great emotional relief. And thus, the mystic experience is real, says Peter L. Berger, but has to be interpreted as an experience of both union and separation simultaneously, just like in the best relationship that we know of in our life experience. And I know from my own experiences of deep meditation, and I lived in the yoga world for more than 15 years, I still meditate. There are moments when I feel like in a deep meditative state, I've completely lost a sense of self. And I tell you, it's a good experience. Yet then I emerge from meditation, and after that stillness that I've experienced, I have then an enhanced sense of my own personhood. Like, that's interesting. I feel like I've lost myself, but I found myself paradoxically at one and the same time. Like, I come out of the meditation experience and I'm still Al. So, which takes me back then to about 4 years ago when I was on a Sunday when a baby girl named Marta was handed to me by her mother. She was placed in my arms, and my new job now, I was to be like the godfather to this baby girl. And I was to present her. My new job was to present her to the priest for communion every Sunday. Now, the event that day happened so swiftly and smoothly. And it was such a relief, I recall at the time, because Marta had not been giving the impression that she was going to cooperate. Like, how would this go? I knew how to handle boys, or a little bit anyway. I'd raised 3 sons. But I'd been feeling a little anxious about how it was going to go with a little girl. I mean, I didn't know what to do with a little girl. So anyway, I said something to the effect, like, the thing went off. It was great, and thumbs up all around. It went well. I wrote at the time, when I reflected on this very special event, it was really one of the greatest days of my life. I mean, it was so wonderful to have the honor to do this. I said something to the effect in my article that there's never been a creation like Marta. And you know what? And there never will be. She's a special child of God. She's unique and particular. I wrote at the time about Marta's shining particularity, and I expressed the thought that surely the God who created Marta is invested in preserving her, which is indeed the Christian promise. It's what makes Christianity unique, and it's the point of what I'm saying today. The person is the glory of the universe. Therefore, Marta is the glory of the universe. I made the affirmation then, I make it again now, that Marta, my goddaughter, has an eternal destiny as a distinctive being. Like, this is wonderful. In Christian terms, Marta's destiny, her destiny, is to be transfigured and glorified, which is why her parents bring her every Sunday to a church sanctuary where the sign at its entrance reads, "Enter the place of transfiguration." The sign does not say, "Enter the place of obliteration." People can choose to obliterate themselves elsewhere. Every Sunday, therefore, I have the privilege of presenting Marta to the priest for Holy Communion in the place of transfiguration. That action, perhaps more than anything else I know, has enabled me to affirm the uniqueness of the Christian faith, and this action, like no other, has helped me to sort out and clarify, indeed, what it is that I believe.